The glass doors of Vertex Technologies gleamed in the morning sunlight as Alexander Reed strode through them, his tailored Italian suit and confident gait marking him as someone who commanded respect. As CEO of one of Boston's fastest-growing tech companies, he had built an empire from nothing, transforming a small startup into a billion-dollar corporation through sheer determination and brilliant innovation. But today, something unusual disrupted his meticulously planned routine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 small figures huddled near the entrance of the towering glass headquarters, their identical faces smudged with dirt, their clothes worn but clean. They couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Identical triplets with striking amber eyes and copper-colored curls that caught the morning light. One held a small cardboard sign, "Please help. Mom is sick." Alexander paused, briefcase in hand. In his 15 years building Vertex, he'd seen plenty of people asking for assistance near the financial district, but never children so young, and certainly never identical triplets. Something about their faces, the particular curve of their cheekbones, the slight upturn of their noses, struck him as oddly familiar. "Sir, your 8:30 meeting is waiting," his assistant reminded him, already holding the elevator. "Give me a moment, Claire," Alexander replied, his eyes still fixed on the children. The smallest of the 3 triplets, distinguishable only by a tiny scar above her eyebrow, stepped forward as Alexander approached. Her amber eyes, too serious for a child so young, met his with surprising steadiness. "Excuse me," Alexander said gently, kneeling to their level despite his expensive suit. "Where is your mother? You shouldn't be out here alone." "Mom's at the hospital," the girl with the scar answered. "I'm Lily. These are my sisters, Rose and Violet." The second girl, Rose apparently, clutched a worn backpack to her chest protectively. "We need money for Mom's medicine. The doctor said she needs special pills." The third girl, Violet, remained silent, her identical amber eyes tracking the movements of passers-by, calculating which might be sympathetic to their cause. "Or where's your father?" Alexander asked, already reaching for his wallet. Something about these children tugged at him in ways he couldn't explain, a strange familiarity that made no sense. The 3 exchanged glances. "We don't have one," Lily answered simply. Alexander handed them several $100 bills, far more than he'd normally give. "This isn't a safe place for children. Do you have someone looking after you while your mother is sick?" "Our neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, watches us sometimes," Rose volunteered, "but she's old and falls asleep a lot." Alexander glanced at his watch. His board meeting was starting. Investors were waiting. Quarterly projections needed approval, yet he couldn't simply walk away. "Wait here," he instructed, pulling out his phone. "I'm going to help you." 20 minutes later, after making several calls and rescheduling his morning meetings, Alexander had arranged for his personal driver to take the children to their apartment, where they would collect essential belongings before being brought to his penthouse. His housekeeper, Mrs. Fernandez, would watch them until he could sort out a more permanent solution. Something about these 3 identical faces had stirred a protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed. "Claire," he called to his assistant as he finally headed for the elevator. "Contact social services. I want to know everything about these children and their mother, and find out what hospital she's in. I want to speak with her doctor personally." "Of course, Mr. Reed," Claire responded, her raised eyebrow the only indication of her surprise at her boss's unusual interest in 3 begging children. That evening, Alexander returned to his penthouse to find it transformed. The usually pristine space, all chrome, glass, and minimalist design, now contained evidence of children, 3 small backpacks by the door, crayons and paper spread, across his imported marble coffee table, and the sound of young voices coming from the kitchen. Mrs. Fernandez greeted him with an uncharacteristically warm smile. "They're good girls, Mr. Reed, very polite considering their circumstances." The triplets sat at his rarely used dining table, eating pasta with surprising decorum for 7-year-olds. 3 identical faces turned toward him as he entered, studying him with that same uncanny intensity he'd noticed earlier. "Mr. Reed," Lily spoke first, always the leader. "Mrs. Fernandez made us spaghetti." "I can see that," Alexander replied, setting down his briefcase. He loosened his tie, suddenly uncertain how to interact with children in his own home. "Are you comfortable? Do you need anything?" Rose, the worrier of the 3, asked immediately, "Did you find out about our mom?" Alexander nodded, taking a seat at the table. "Your mother is at Boston Memorial. Her name is Diana Morgan, correct?" 3 identical nods answered him. "She has pneumonia, but she's receiving treatment. The doctors say she'll recover, but she'll need to stay in the hospital for at least another week." Relief washed over their faces, but Violet, the quietest and most observant, tilted her head. "Why are you helping us? People usually just give us money or tell us to go away." It was a fair question, one Alexander had been asking himself all day. Why had he rearranged his schedule, opened his home, and personally involved himself in the welfare of 3 strange children? He could have simply called social services and continued with his day. "I'm not entirely sure," he answered honestly. "But no one your age should be begging on the street, especially when your mother is ill." What Alexander didn't share was the information Claire had uncovered during the day. Diana Morgan, 32, worked as a lab technician at a pharmaceutical company. A single mother raising triplets alone, she had no family support and minimal resources. Most concerning was that the triplets' birth certificates listed no father. The space had been left blank. After the children were settled in the guest room, Alexander sat in his study, staring at the city lights below. The timing was approximately right, almost 8 years ago. He had been building Vertex, working endless hours, but there had been someone, a research assistant named Diana, who had worked in his lab during the company's early days. They had spent one night together after a breakthrough celebration, and then she had left the company suddenly, citing a family emergency. Had she been pregnant with his children? The next morning, Alexander arranged for a respected pediatrician to visit his penthouse, ostensibly to ensure the triplets were healthy after their time on the street. Dr. Patterson, a motherly woman in her 50s who had been Alexander's own doctor in childhood, arrived promptly at 9. "Quite unusual for you to have house guests, Alex," she remarked as she set up her equipment, "especially young ones." Alexander explained the situation briefly, then added in a lower voice, "There's something else, Elizabeth. I need DNA samples, discreetly." Dr. Patterson's eyebrows shot up. "You think these children are related to you?" "It's a possibility I need to eliminate," he replied carefully. The doctor nodded, understanding immediately. "Simple cheek swabs. They won't even notice." The triplets proved to be healthy despite their circumstances. Underweight but not dangerously so, with no signs of abuse or serious neglect. As promised, Dr. Patterson collected the DNA samples without raising suspicion, disguising them as routine throat swabs. "Results in 48 hours, she promised Alexander before leaving. Expedited, as requested. While waiting for the results, Alexander visited Boston Memorial Hospital to meet Diana Morgan. The woman lying in the hospital bed bore little resemblance to the vibrant research assistant he remembered. Her once lustrous brown hair lay limp against the pillow, her face gaunt from illness. But her amber eyes, the same striking color as the triplets, widened in shock when she saw him. "Alexander Reed," she whispered, her voice hoarse from coughing. "What are you doing here? Your daughters were begging outside my building." he replied, taking a seat beside her bed. "They're staying with me until you recover." Diana closed her eyes, embarrassment and gratitude warring on her face. "I told them to stay with Mrs. Peterson. I never imagined they would." She broke off, coughing. "They're worried about you," Alexander said, "especially about the cost of your medicine." A tear slipped down Diana's cheek. "I've tried so hard to provide for them, to keep them safe and healthy. But medical bills, rent increases, it's been impossible lately." Alexander studied her face, searching for the right words. "Diana, I need to ask you something. The triplets, they're yours," she interrupted, meeting his gaze directly. "I know that's why you're really here. You recognized something in them, didn't you?" The confirmation, though expected, hit Alexander like a physical blow. "Why didn't you tell me?" Diana looked away. "You were building Vertex. It was your dream, everything you'd worked for. I was just a lab assistant who'd made the mistake of falling for my brilliant boss." She shrugged weakly. "I didn't want to be the reason your vision failed." "That wasn't your decision to make," Alexander responded, an edge of anger in his voice. "They're my daughters. I had a right to know them." "Yes," Diana admitted softly, "that was my mistake. I told myself I was being noble, but perhaps I was just afraid you'd reject us. By the time the girls were born, you were already making headlines as Boston's newest tech genius. It seemed too late." Before Alexander could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message. "Dr. Patterson, results confirmed. 997% probability of paternity for all 3 subjects." Though he'd already known the truth in his heart, seeing the scientific confirmation sent a wave of emotion through Alexander that he hadn't expected. A complex mixture of anger, wonder, and something else. Something that felt strangely like longing for all the years he'd missed. "I want to be part of their lives," he said finally, his voice firm. "I've lost 7 years with my daughters. I won't lose any more." Diana nodded slowly. "They deserve to know their father, and they deserve more than I've been able to give them." She hesitated. "But Alexander, they're not accessories or projects. They're people. Complicated, individual people who happen to look identical. They've had a difficult life. They won't fit neatly into your world of board meetings and business acquisitions." "I understand that," he replied, though in truth he had no idea how to integrate 3 7-year-old girls into his carefully structured life. All he knew was that he had to try. The next evening, after confirming Diana's condition was improving, Alexander sat the triplets down in his living room. Though identical in appearance, he'd begun to notice the subtle differences in their personalities. Lily, the natural leader, protective and slightly suspicious. Rose, sensitive and anxious, always worrying about what might go wrong. And Violet, quiet but keenly observant, missing nothing. "I need to tell you something important," he began, suddenly nervous in a way he never was when addressing shareholders or negotiating multi-million-dollar deals. "I knew your mother a long time ago, before you were born." Lily's eyes narrowed immediately. "How?" "She worked in my laboratory when I was starting my company. She was very intelligent and helped me solve some difficult problems." Rose hugged her ever-present backpack closer. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Diana approached, handing him a cup of coffee. "Penny for your thoughts." "I was just thinking about the day I found them," Alexander replied. "Or perhaps the day they found me. If they hadn't chosen Vertex to beg outside of..." "It wasn't random," Diana interrupted, her expression serious. "I never told them about you, but they found an old photograph of us in my memory box. Lily recognized the Vertex logo on your lab coat. They deliberately went there, hoping to see you." Alexander stared. at her in shock. They knew, not exactly. They knew you worked there once, that you might be important to me. They're incredibly resourceful when they work together. Diana smiled. They engineered your discovery of them, Alexander. The brightest minds in your company couldn't have. Designed a better strategy. Alexander laughed, watching his daughters now, Lily organizing a game for the other children, Rose carefully documenting the day in a journal she'd been given, Violet sketching the scene before her with remarkable accuracy. 3 extraordinary minds, 3 identical faces, 3 distinct souls who had changed everything he thought he knew about success and purpose. "I'm glad they found me," he said simply. And for a man who had built a fortune on complex technological innovations, it was perhaps the most profound truth he'd ever discovered. 1 month into their new living arrangement, Alexander found himself sitting in the principal's office at Brookside Elementary, an experience entirely foreign to a man, accustomed to boardrooms and executive suites. Across from him, Principal Winters, a stern woman with prematurely grey hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, reviewed the incident report with pursed lips. "Mr. Reed, I understand your situation is unusual," she began, choosing her words carefully. But Lily's behavior today was unacceptable. She punched another student. Alexander shifted uncomfortably in the small plastic chair clearly designed for someone much smaller. Was the other child injured? Fortunately, no, but that's hardly the point. Principal Winters removed her glasses. According to witnesses, the boy was teasing Rose about not having a father. Lily intervened rather forcefully. The protective instinct that had been growing in Alexander since finding the triplets flared immediately. "So this boy was bullying my daughter about her family situation, and Lily defended her sister." Principal Winters sighed. "Violence is never the appropriate response, Mr. Reed. Lily needs to learn to handle conflict without resorting to physical aggression." Alexander nodded, conceding the point while privately feeling a surge of pride in Lily's fierce loyalty. "I understand. I'll speak with her." "There's something else," Principal Winters added, her expression softening slightly. "The girls' teacher reports that they're extremely bright, testing well above grade level in most subjects, but they're struggling socially. They interact almost exclusively with each other, rarely engaging with classmates. They've always been each other's primary companions," Alexander explained. "Their mother worked multiple jobs. There wasn't much opportunity for play dates or social activities. I understand their circumstances have been challenging. However, social development is crucial." Principal Winters handed him a brochure. "Our school psychologist offers family counseling. Given your recent discovery of parenthood, it might be beneficial for all of you." Alexander accepted the brochure, swallowing his instinctive rejection of the suggestion. 6 weeks ago, he would have dismissed the idea that Alexander Reed, boy genius turned tech mogul, needed psychological counseling of any sort. But 6 weeks ago, he hadn't been responsible for 3 7-year-old girls whose emotional well-being now seemed more important than any corporate acquisition. "I'll discuss it with their mother," he promised. Lily waited outside the office, her small face set in a determined expression that mirrored Alexander's own when facing down difficult board members. Her copper curls had escaped their neat ponytail, and her school uniform was slightly askew, but there was no remorse in her amber eyes. "Am I in big trouble?" she asked as they walked toward the car where Thomas waited. Alexander considered his response carefully. "Principal Winters and I agree that hitting isn't the right way to solve problems." Lily kicked at a pebble on the sidewalk. "He called Rose a liar. She told the class we found our dad, and he said she was making it up because nobody would want to be our dad." Her small hands clenched into fists again at the memory. Then Rose started crying. Alexander felt a complex surge of emotions, anger at the child who had hurt his daughters, sadness at the reality behind the taunt, and a renewed awareness of how difficult this transition was for all of them. He crouched down to Lily's eye level, something he was learning to do when important conversations were needed. "I'm sorry that happened. Where were Rose and Violet when this occurred?" Violet took Rose to the bathroom to calm down. "I stayed to make him sorry." Alexander suppressed a smile at her fierce expression. "I understand wanting to protect your sisters. That's admirable, but there are better ways to handle people who say hurtful things." Lily looked skeptical. "Like what?" "Mrs. Peterson always said if someone hits you, hit them back harder so they learn not to mess with you." Alexander winced, making a mental note to discuss with Diana the various life lessons imparted by their elderly former neighbor. "In business," he said, shifting to terrain he understood better, "when someone tries to undermine me, responding with aggression usually makes the situation worse. I've found it more effective to demonstrate my value through results. Success is the best revenge." Lily considered this, her expression thoughtful. "So instead of punching Jeremy, I should just prove him wrong by having the best dad." The simple statement caught Alexander off guard, a warm pressure building in his chest. "Something like that," he managed. "And perhaps we could arrange some play dates with classmates who are kinder. Building alliances is another important strategy." Lily nodded seriously, processing this new approach. As they reached the car, she slipped her small hand into his, the first time she had initiated such contact. "I still think he deserved to get punched," she muttered. Alexander squeezed her hand gently. "Between us, I think so too. But let's keep that opinion to ourselves." The incident at school prompted the first serious co-parenting discussion between Alexander and Diana. After the triplets were asleep, they sat in the garden between their adjoining houses, the space Alexander had specifically designed to facilitate family connection while respecting boundaries. "The school suggested family counseling," Alexander said, handing Diana the brochure. "Given the circumstances, it might be helpful." Diana sipped her tea, considering. "You've never struck me as someone who puts much stock in therapy." "I've never been a father before." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that betrayed his uncertainty, something rare for a man whose corporate persona was built on unwavering confidence. "I'm making this up as I go, Diana. My own father was hardly a model to emulate." Diana's expression softened. "You're doing better than you think. The girls are responding to you, even Lily, who trusts approximately no one. She punched a classmate today." A smile tugged at Diana's lips. She's always been protective. When they were 4, a boy at the park pushed Violet off the swing. Lily bit him. Alexander laughed despite himself. "Somehow that doesn't surprise me." He grew serious again. "The triplets are exceptional children, Diana. Their intelligence, their resilience, they deserve every opportunity I can provide." Opportunity isn't just about private schools and trust funds, Alexander. They need emotional security, consistency, normal childhood experiences. Diana set down her cup. "But yes, I think counseling might help us navigate this situation. None of this is in the standard parenting manual, if such a thing exists." The family counseling began the following week. Awkward sessions where Dr. Martinez, a gentle-voiced woman with kind eyes, encouraged the triplets to express their feelings about the dramatic changes in their lives. Rose proved the most willing to share her fears and anxieties, pouring out in a torrent once permission was given. Violet rarely spoke, but would draw elaborate pictures representing her emotions. Lily remained guarded, answering questions with minimal information. Watching Alexander with cautious eyes. During a parents-only session, Dr. Martinez addressed the underlying tension directly. Alexander, you're clearly committed to providing for the girls materially, but I sense hesitation in fully embracing the emotional aspects of fatherhood. Alexander, uncomfortable with such direct personal assessment, instinctively defaulted to the analytical. I'm establishing trust gradually. Given the circumstances, that seems the most logical approach. Parenting isn't logical, Diana interjected softly. I've spent 7 years learning that lesson. Dr. Martinez nodded. Children need authenticity. They can sense when adults are holding back. The triplets, despite their identical appearance, each need different things from you. Lily needs to know you won't abandon them. Rose needs reassurance that her world is stable, and Violet needs space to express herself in her own way. Alexander, accustomed to approaching problems with his intellect rather than his heart, found these sessions challenging but illuminating. The corporate world had trained him to compartmentalize emotions, to make decisions based on data and strategic advantage. Parenting, he was discovering, required the opposite approach. Full emotional engagement, intuitive responses, vulnerability. The real breakthrough came not during a therapy session, but during an autumn storm that knocked out power to their neighborhood. Alexander, working late in his home office, heard the small knock at his door, just as the lights flickered and died. "Dad," Rose's tentative voice called through the darkness. It was the first time any of the triplets had called him Dad rather than Alexander, and the impact of those 3 letters momentarily overwhelmed him. He opened the door to find all 3 girls in their pajamas, clutching flashlights and looking uncharacteristically apprehensive. "The power went out at Mum's house," Lily explained, her usual bravado subdued. "She's looking for candles." "Duh, we don't like the dark," Rose admitted, clutching her ever-present backpack. "Mum usually lets us all sleep in her room during storms." "Can we stay with you until the lights come back?" Violet asked, her soft voice nearly drowned out by a crash of thunder that made all 3 jump. Alexander found himself nodding, oddly touched that they had sought him out rather than waiting for Diana to find the candles. "Of course. I have emergency lights in the kitchen. We could make hot chocolate if you'd like." The simple offer transformed the mood immediately. Soon, Alexander found himself sitting on the kitchen floor with his daughters, surrounded by battery-operated lanterns, sipping hot chocolate made on his gas stove, and listening to the triplets explain their elaborate theory about thunderstorms being caused by giants bowling in the clouds, a story Diana had invented to help them cope with their fear. "Mum says the loudest thunder is when they get a strike," Rose informed him seriously. "That makes a lot of sense," Alexander replied, finding himself genuinely charmed by the whimsical explanation so different from the scientific facts he would naturally have offered. As the storm continued, the triplets began asking questions about his childhood. Had he been afraid of storms? "Were you friends?" Alexander chose his words carefully. "We were. And I've recently discovered something I didn't know before, something that might be surprising." Violet, who had been studying him intently, spoke up. "You're our father, aren't you?" Alexander's breath caught. He shouldn't have been surprised. Diana had mentioned Violet's uncanny perceptiveness. But hearing the little girl state it so directly was startling. "Yes," he confirmed. "I am. I didn't know until now, or I would have been part of your lives from the beginning." The 3 identical faces registered different emotions: shock from Rose, calculation from Lily, and quiet acceptance from Violet. "If you're our dad, why are you so rich while we have to beg?" Lily demanded, her young voice harsh with accusation. It was a fair question, one that had been tormenting Alexander since he'd realized the truth. "Your mother never told me about you," she thought. He paused, trying to explain Diana's reasoning in terms children could understand. "She thought I was too busy with my company to be a good father." "Are you?" This from Rose, her eyes wide with worry. "I don't know," Alexander answered honestly. "I've never been a father before, but I want to try. I want to know you, all of you, and help take care of you and your mother." Violet, who had been silent, finally asked, "Does Mom know you found out about us?" "Yes, I visited her at the hospital yesterday. She agreed that you should know the truth." Lily crossed her arms. "So what happens now? Do we have to live here, in this fancy place?" "No, decisions have to be made right away," Alexander assured them, sensing their apprehension. "For now, you'll stay here until your mother is better. Then we'll all talk together about what comes next." That night, Alexander found himself standing in the doorway of the guest room, watching his daughters sleep. They had pushed the twin beds together to form one large bed and lay curled around each other like puppies, 3 identical faces, peaceful in sleep. His daughters. The word felt foreign, but right. His phone buzzed with messages from his executive. Team, questions about the Asian market expansion, concerns about the delayed product launch, reminders about tomorrow's investor calls. For the first time in his career, Alexander silenced his phone without responding. The business empire he'd built would have to wait. Over the next week, as Diana recovered in the hospital, Alexander began the bewildering process of getting to know his daughters. He learned that Lily excelled at mathematics and could calculate complex sums in her head, that Rose had an extraordinary memory and could recite entire books after reading them once, that Violet rarely spoke, but created intricate drawings that revealed a depth of perception unusual in a child her age. He discovered that all 3 loved strawberry ice cream, but hated bananas, that they had a secret language only they understood, that they preferred to sleep in the same room despite his offers of individual bedrooms. He learned that they were fiercely protective of each other and deeply devoted to their mother, who had worked multiple jobs to support them. Alexander also began to understand what Diana had meant about the girls not fitting neatly into his world. His housekeeper resigned after Rose accidentally set off the fire alarm during an impromptu science experiment. His minimalist living room became cluttered with books, toys, and art supplies. His carefully scheduled days now included trips to the park, impromptu pizza dinners, and long conversations answering questions about everything from why the sky is blue to how computers work. Strangely, he found himself enjoying these disruptions. The triplets' curiosity reminded him of his own childhood fascination with technology, a pure love of discovery that had driven his early innovations, but had somewhere been lost amid quarterly projections and market strategies. When Diana was finally released from the hospital, Alexander arranged for her to stay in his penthouse while they determined next steps. She was initially reluctant, but her daughter's excitement and the practical reality of her situation, she had lost her apartment while hospitalized, convinced her to accept temporarily. "The girls seem happy," Diana observed one evening as they watched the triplets playing an elaborate game of their own invention in the living room. "I haven't seen them this carefree in a long time." "They're extraordinary," Alexander replied. "All of them, in different ways. I wish I'd known them from the beginning." Diana's face softened with regret. "I made a mistake keeping them from you. I convinced myself I was protecting them and you, but perhaps I was really protecting myself from possible rejection." "We can't change the past," Alexander said, "but we can determine what happens next." What happened next surprised everyone, including Alexander himself. Rather than returning to his previous life with minor adjustments for his newly discovered family, he found himself re-evaluating everything. The company that had been his sole focus for 15 years now seemed less important than the 3 small humans who carried his DNA. 2 months after finding the triplets begging outside Vertex Technologies, Alexander announced a restructuring of company leadership. He would remain as chairman but step down as CEO, allowing his trusted COO to assume daily operations. The business world was shocked. Financial publications speculated about health problems or strategic disagreements. But Alexander offered no explanations beyond a desire for better work-life balance. Diana and the triplets moved into a spacious brownstone Alexander purchased in a family-friendly neighborhood with excellent schools. He bought the house next door for himself, creating a connected compound with shared garden space between the homes. The arrangement gave Diana the independence she valued, while allowing Alexander to be present daily in his daughters' lives. The transition wasn't always smooth. Lily remained suspicious of Alexander's intentions for months, challenging his authority and questioning his commitment. Rose worried constantly that something would go wrong, that Alexander would leave, that Diana would get sick again, that their newfound stability would collapse. Violet watched and waited, her amber eyes missing nothing, drawing elaborate pictures of their new family configuration, as if to make it real on paper. Alexander made mistakes too, scheduling business calls during school performances, buying extravagant gifts when simpler ones would have meant more, struggling to understand the complex emotional needs of 3 growing girls who had spent years in precarious circumstances. But they learned together. Alexander attended parenting classes, read books on child development, and consulted with family therapists. Diana gradually allowed herself to trust Alexander's commitment, not just to the triplets, but to the unconventional family they were building together. The girls slowly accepted that their father wasn't going to disappear, that their mother wasn't going to get sick again, that they wouldn't have to beg on street corners anymore. A year after that fateful morning outside Vertex Technologies, Alexander hosted a birthday party for the triplets' 8th birthday. The brownstone garden was transformed with balloons, streamers, and a magnificent cake decorated with each girl's favorite things: mathematical symbols for Lily, books for Rose, and detailed illustrated scenes for Violet. As he watched his daughters, each now developing distinct styles and interests despite their identical appearances, Alexander reflected on how completely his life had changed. The man who had once measured success in stock prices and market share now found his greatest achievements in Lily's improving trust, Rose's decreasing anxiety, and Violet's increasingly frequent smiles. What had his parents done to comfort him? Alexander found himself sharing stories he hadn't recalled in decades, about hiding under blankets with books and flashlights, about the model rockets he'd built in his bedroom, about his early fascination with computers. "You were a nerd," Lily declared with newfound respect. "The very definition of one," Alexander agreed, surprised to find himself laughing. When Diana arrived 20 minutes later, having located candles and grown concerned about the girls' whereabouts, she found all 4 sitting on the kitchen floor, Alexander in his expensive dress shirt and suit pants, demonstrating how to make shadow puppets against the wall using the flashlights. Something shifted after the night of the storm. The triplets began seeking Alexander out more frequently, Lily bringing him mathematical puzzles she couldn't solve, Rose asking for help with the advanced reading material she preferred, Violet silently presenting her drawings for his appreciation. Small moments accumulated: breakfast conversations, bedtime stories, weekend excursions to museums and parks. Alexander found his calendar, once dominated by investor meetings and product development sessions, increasingly filled with school performances, doctor appointments, and soccer practices. His executive team adapted to his new schedule with varying degrees of grace, but Alexander discovered that his absence had unexpected benefits for company culture. Talented employees stepped up to fill the leadership gap, bringing fresh perspectives that had previously been overshadowed by his dominant presence. Not everything progressed smoothly. The triplets still had nightmares about the precarious years when Diana's illness had left them nearly homeless. They still sometimes hoarded food, a habit developed during times of scarcity. Rose still carried her backpack everywhere, filled with emergency supplies, just in case. Lily still approached happiness with suspicion, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Violet still retreated into silence when overwhelmed. The most challenging moment came 3 months after the triplets had moved into the brownstone. Alexander arrived to pick them up for their weekly dinner, a standing appointment that had become precious to him, only to find the house empty and Diana's phone going straight to voicemail. Panic gripped him immediately, visions of Diana fleeing, with the children returning to a life of struggle rather than accepting his help. After an hour of increasingly frantic searching, he found them at Boston Memorial Hospital. Diana, pale but composed, sat in the waiting room with the triplets, who were unusually subdued. "What happened?" Alexander demanded, relief and residual fear making his voice sharper than intended. "Routine checkup," Diana explained quietly. "My oncologist wanted to see me." The word hit Alexander like a physical blow. "Oncologist? Diana, what aren't you telling me?" She gestured toward the triplets, indicating this wasn't the time or place for such a discussion. Alexander understood immediately, shifting his attention to the girls, who were watching this exchange with identical, worried expressions. Later, after the triplets were asleep, Diana explained. The pneumonia that had hospitalized her months earlier had led to additional tests, which revealed early-stage lymphoma. She had been undergoing treatment while establishing their new living arrangement, hiding the appointments and symptoms from both Alexander and, as much as possible, the triplets. "Why keep this from me?" Alexander asked, hurt and confusion evident in his voice. "I could have helped, arranged for the best specialists, taken more responsibility for the girls during your treatment." Diana's expression hardened slightly. "I've handled my health issues independently for years, Alexander. Single mothers don't have the luxury of falling apart when they get sick." "But you're not alone anymore," he countered, frustration rising. "The whole point of our arrangement is to provide support for you and the triplets." "The point of our arrangement," Diana corrected gently, "is to give the girls a relationship with their father. My medical situation is separate." Alexander recognized the stubborn independence that had both attracted him to Diana years ago and enabled her to raise 3 children alone under impossible circumstances. But this wasn't a negotiation where he could simply overwhelm the opposition with superior resources or persistence. "The triplets need you," he said finally, finding the one argument she couldn't dismiss. "And I need your guidance to be the father they deserve. Please let me help, not as some corporate takeover, but as a partner in raising our daughters." The mention of partnership finally reached her. Diana agreed to let Alexander assist with her treatment plan, arranging consultations with leading oncologists and adjusting their co-parenting schedule to accommodate her treatment days. This crisis, though frightening, cemented their nascent partnership in a way that might otherwise have taken years. For the triplets, Diana's illness triggered their deepest fears, memories of their mother's previous hospitalizations, of being left with neighbors or alone while she worked despite being sick, of counting coins to buy medicine. Alexander found Lily sitting on the stairs late one night, keeping watch over both houses with grim determination. "You should be asleep," he said gently, sitting beside her. "I need to make sure everyone's okay," she replied, her small voice serious beyond her years. "If Mom gets sick like before, I have to be ready." Alexander felt his heart constrict. "Your mother is getting excellent treatment, Lily, and you don't have to be the protector anymore. That's my job now." Lily studied him skeptically. "You weren't there before. When Mom couldn't get out of bed, when we ran out of food, when the Landlord came banging on the door. "No, I wasn't," Alexander acknowledged, the admission painful but necessary, "and I'm deeply sorry for that. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." "You promise?" The vulnerability in her question, from his fiercest, most self-sufficient daughter, nearly undid him. "I promise." Alexander hesitated, then added, "Would you like to see something that might help you believe me?" Lily nodded cautiously. Alexander led her to his home office and unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside was a legal document, his revised will, naming Diana as the triplets' guardian, but establishing a substantial trust for their care and education, with his sister Charlotte as trustee. "This is a promise on paper," he explained, as Lily examined the document she couldn't fully understand, but recognized as important. "No matter what happens, you and your sisters will always be taken care of. You'll never have to beg or worry about food or medicine or housing again." Lily traced the names on the document with a small finger. "Our names are here: Lily Elizabeth Reed, Rose Catherine Reed, Violet Ann Reed." Alexander nodded. "I had your birth certificates amended to include my name and to change your surname, with your mother's permission. Legally and in every other way that matters, you are my daughters." Lily was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with her usual intensity. "Does this mean we're rich now?" Alexander couldn't help but smile at the practical question. "It means you're secure. There's a difference." In the months that followed, as Diana responded well to treatment and the family settled into more comfortable routines, Alexander found himself reflecting on that distinction often. His own childhood had been materially comfortable, but emotionally barren, parents too focused on appearances and achievements to provide real security. He had built Vertex partly to prove his worth to a father who measured success solely in financial terms, creating a fortune that had given him everything except what mattered most. The triplets' early years had been the opposite. Materially, precarious but rich, with love and emotional connection. Diana had given them security of a different kind, ensuring they always felt valued and loved despite their circumstances. Combining these approaches, material resources and emotional abundance, became Alexander's unspoken mission. He converted one wing of his corporate headquarters into a state-of-the-art learning lab where the triplets could explore their interests after school. Lily tackling advanced mathematics with research scientists, Rose devouring literature and history with humanities PhDs, Violet working with the design team to develop her artistic talents. But he was equally intentional about simpler experiences, teaching them to ride bikes in the park, building sandcastles at the beach, making pancakes on Sunday mornings. The corporate world noticed the change in Alexander Reed. Financial publications that had once described him as ruthlessly focused and intimidatingly brilliant now noted that the tech genius seemed more approachable and surprisingly grounded. Colleagues who had respected but feared him found him more willing to listen, more patient with mistakes, more aware of the human elements in business decisions. "Fatherhood suits you," commented his COO, Nathaniel, after observing Alexander patiently explaining a complex algorithm to Lily during a weekend visit to the office. "You're less terrifying?" Alexander suggested wryly. "I was going to say rigid, but terrifying works too," Nathaniel smiled. "The board was concerned when you stepped back, but the company's actually performing better. You've delegated authority to people who were too intimidated to use their full talents before. Turns out the best thing you could do for Vertex was spend less time here." It wasn't all smooth sailing. Diana's treatment, though ultimately successful, had difficult moments. The triplets, despite their improving adjustment, still struggled with the after effects of years of instability. Alexander himself sometimes felt overwhelmed by the emotional complexity of his new role, the vulnerability it required, so different from the controlled corporate persona he had perfected. The winter holidays, the first they would celebrate as a family, brought particular challenges. Alexander had never paid much attention to Christmas beyond obligatory corporate parties and year-end bonuses. Diana had always made the season magical for the triplets, despite limited resources, creating traditions that were precious to them. "We always make ornaments," Rose informed Alexander earnestly as they discussed holiday plans. "And leave cookies for Santa, even though Lily says he's statistically impossible. Mom lets us sleep under the tree on Christmas Eve," Violet added, one of her increasingly frequent voluntary contributions to conversation. "And we volunteer at the shelter on Christmas morning," Lily said, watching Alexander carefully for his reaction. "Before we open presents, because Mom says it's important to remember people who don't have families." Alexander, who had been planning to shower the triplets with extravagant gifts to make up for 7 missed Christmases, realized that Diana had already given them something more valuable: perspective, gratitude, awareness of their responsibility to others. "Those sound like wonderful traditions," he said thoughtfully. "Perhaps we could continue them and add some new ones together." The holiday season became a lesson in balance, honoring Diana's thoughtful traditions while adding new experiences the family could share. They volunteered at the shelter together on Christmas morning, the triplets proudly introducing their father to people they had met during harder times. Alexander arranged for a horse-drawn sleigh ride through Boston Common, delighting in the girls' excitement at this fairy tale experience. Diana taught Alexander her recipe for gingerbread cookies, the kitchen filled with laughter as his first attempts failed spectacularly. On Christmas Eve, all 5 of them gathered in Diana's living room, the tree adorned with both handmade ornaments and elegant glass ones Alexander had purchased. The triplets wearing matching pajamas, a concession to Diana's love of seeing them dressed identically for special occasions, arranged their sleeping bags under the tree, maintaining their favorite tradition. "You could stay too," Rose suggested, looking up at Alexander with hopeful eyes. "There's room." "That's a very kind invitation," Alexander replied, touched by the inclusion. "But I think this tradition belongs to you and your mother." Later, as he prepared to return to his side of the connected homes, Diana walked him to the door. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for understanding the importance of preserving some things that are just ours." Alexander nodded. "I'm learning that family isn't about possession or control. It's about connection and respect." Diana smiled, the warmth in her eyes reminding him of what had drawn them together years ago. "Quite a revelation for a corporate titan." "I had good teachers," he replied, glancing toward the living room where the triplets were already nestled in their sleeping bags, whispering together in their secret language. As Alexander stepped into the cold December night, walking the short path to his own door, he reflected on the extraordinary year behind him. From the moment he'd spotted 3 identical faces outside Vertex Technologies, his life had changed in ways no business plan or market analysis could have predicted. The journey from CEO to father had required him to access parts of himself long neglected: vulnerability, patience, humility, joy. The triplets were changing too, their identical exteriors increasingly housing distinct individuals. Lily's protective fierceness was softening into leadership, her mathematical gifts flourishing now that she didn't have to focus solely on survival. Rose's anxiety was gradually yielding to curiosity, her extraordinary memory and love of learning finding proper channels. Violet's watchful silence was giving way to thoughtful communication, her artistic expression becoming more confident and detailed. Diana had changed as well, the constant stress of single parenthood under desperate circumstances replaced by a measured partnership that respected her independence while providing much-needed support. Her health was improving, her career advancing, with Alexander's connections opening doors previously closed to her. As for Alexander himself, the transformation was so profound he sometimes barely recognized the man he had been before. The driven CEO who measured value in market share and innovation patents now found himself equally invested in school science fairs and bedtime stories. His definition of success, once limited to professional achievements, had expanded to include the trust gradually building in Lily's eyes, the decreasing frequency of Rose's nightmares, the increasing melody of Violet's voice. Standing in the doorway of his home, Alexander could see through the connected gardens to Diana's living room, a window where the Christmas tree lights illuminated 3 small figures and 1 adult shadow. The scene stirred something in him that went beyond the unexpected joy of fatherhood, a recognition that family, in all its complicated, messy glory, was the adventure he had never known he wanted, but now couldn't imagine living without. The tech genius, who had built an empire on algorithms and innovations, was learning the most complex code of all, the language of family, of belonging, of love that demanded nothing in return. It was a lesson worth every moment of the journey, every challenge still to come. Spring arrived in Boston with a burst of color, the gardens between the 2 brownstones blooming with tulips and daffodils that the triplets had planted the previous autumn. As Alexander sipped his morning coffee on the patio, watching the early light filter through newly budded trees, he reflected on the remarkable transformation of the past 18 months. The cold, efficient penthouse that had once represented the pinnacle of his success now sat empty, listed for sale, but oddly difficult to part with, the final vestige of his former life. The sound of the back door opening interrupted his thoughts. Violet stepped out, sketchbook in hand, her copper curls caught up in a messy bun that distinguished her from her sisters, who had recently begun experimenting with different hairstyles to assert their individuality. "Morning," she said quietly, settling into the chair beside him. Of the 3, Violet had remained the most reserved, her observations keen, but her words measured. Yet over time, she had developed a comfortable silence with Alexander, a shared appreciation for early mornings and peaceful contemplation. "Good morning," he replied, watching as she opened her sketchbook. "New project?" Violet nodded, already absorbed in her drawing. "It's for the art competition at school. I'm creating a series called Before and After." Alexander leaned over slightly to observe her work. The page showed 2 homes, one a tiny apartment with sparse furnishings, 3 small beds crammed into a single room. The other their current brownstones with the connecting garden. The detail was remarkable for a child not yet 9, the perspective sophisticated, the emotional undertone palpable. "It's our story," Violet explained, noticing his interest. "How things changed when we found you." The simple statement, delivered in Violet's matter-of-fact tone, caused Alexander's throat to tighten unexpectedly. "It's extraordinary," he managed after a moment. "You have a genuine talent." Violet continued sketching, adding small details to the garden. "Mom says I get it from your mother. She was an artist too, right?" Alexander nodded, surprised. He rarely spoke of his parents, who had died in a car accident shortly after he founded Vertex. His relationship with them had been complicated. His father distant and demanding. His mother gentle but ineffectual, encountering his father's rigid expectations. "Yes, she was, though she rarely practiced after marrying my father. He considered art impractical." Violet glanced up, her amber eyes, so like his own, studying him with that penetrating gaze that sometimes made Alexander feel thoroughly transparent. "That's sad," she said finally. To stop doing something you love because someone else doesn't value it. The observation, profound in its simplicity, resonated with unexpected force. How many decisions in his own life had been shaped by his father's narrow definition of success? How much of Vertex's relentless focus on technological advancement and market dominance reflected Alexander's internalized need to prove his worth in terms his father would have recognized? "It is sad," he agreed, "and unnecessary. I hope you know that I value your art, Violet. All forms of creativity and expression are valuable, not just those with obvious commercial applications." Violet smiled slightly, one of her rare, genuine smiles that transformed her serious face. "I know. That's why I'm doing this series, to remember where we came from, but also to celebrate where we are now." Before Alexander could respond, the peaceful morning erupted into joyful chaos as Rose burst through the door, waving a letter excitedly. It came. Harvard's summer science program for gifted students. I got in. She bounced on her toes, her recently cut shoulder-length hair, a departure from the identical styles the triplets had worn most of their lives, swinging with her excitement. Alexander set down his coffee cup to examine the acceptance letter Rose thrust at him. The program was highly selective, admitting only 20 students annually to work alongside Harvard researchers in university laboratories. That Rose had been accepted at 8 when most participants were at least 12 was extraordinary. "This is outstanding, Rose," he said, genuine pride evident in his voice. "You've worked incredibly hard for this opportunity." Rose beamed. Her earlier anxieties about academic acceptance substantially diminished through consistent encouragement and appropriate intellectual challenges. "The recommendation from Dr. Ellington at Vertex probably helped," she acknowledged, "and the independent research project you helped me design." "The recommendation opened a door," Alexander corrected gently. "Your brilliant mind and dedication earned your place." He had learned through numerous parenting books, counseling sessions, and Diana's guidance that balancing praise with reality was crucial for developing healthy self-esteem. The back door opened again, this time revealing Lily with her hair plaited into an intricate braid, Diana's handiwork, clearly, and an expression that indicated she was working through a complex problem. "Mum says to remind you about the meeting with Principal Winters today," she announced, helping herself to a sip of Alexander's coffee and making a face at the bitterness. "They want to discuss our academic placement for next year." Alexander checked his watch, making a mental note. The triplets' exceptional intelligence had presented challenges for conventional education, with Brookside Elementary struggling to accommodate their advanced abilities while maintaining age-appropriate social development. "I haven't forgotten," he assured Lily. The meeting represented months of careful negotiation, with Alexander advocating for acceleration and specialized instruction, while Diana emphasized the importance of normal childhood experiences and peer relationships. "Good," Lily said, dropping into a chair and helping herself to a piece of toast from Alexander's plate, with the casual familiarity that had gradually developed between them. "Because I've prepared a presentation about why we should skip third. Grade entirely and move directly to fourth." Alexander suppressed a smile. Lily's strategic approach to persuasion, complete with slideshows and data visualization, reflected her natural leadership abilities, now channeled into more productive outlets than protecting her family from imminent disaster. "Mom won't agree." "To skipping grades," Rose reminded her sister, always pragmatic. "She thinks we need social time with kids our age." Lily waved this objection away. "I have contingency plans, separate advanced classes for subjects where we excel, standard classes for others, a targeted compromise." Alexander, listening to this exchange with quiet amusement, marveled again at how each triplet processed the world differently despite their identical genetic makeup. Lily analyzed and strategized, always 3 moves ahead. Rose catalogued and categorized, organizing information meticulously. Violet observed and synthesized, her quiet exterior concealing profound empathic understanding. As the girls continued their discussion, Diana appeared at the door, dressed for her laboratory position at Massachusetts General Hospital, a role Alexander had helped her secure once her health stabilized, allowing her to utilize her scientific training in meaningful work with reasonable hours. "I see the committee is convened," she remarked with a smile, joining them on the patio. "No decisions about advanced placement without parental consensus. Remember, we discuss options together. Learn." The triplets nodded in unison. Some habits remained despite their increasing individuation. And Diana turned to Alexander. "We should leave in 20 minutes if we want to make the appointment with Principal Winters. I've prepared counter-arguments to whatever acceleration proposal you've developed." The playful challenge in her voice reflected their evolving relationship, partners in parenting, if not in romance, though Alexander sometimes found himself watching Diana with the same fascination that had drawn him to her years ago. Her strength, intelligence, and unwavering dedication to their daughters continually impressed him. "I've prepared counter-arguments to your counter-arguments," he replied with equal lightness, "but I suspect we'll reach a reasonable compromise, as usual." Their meeting with Principal Winters later that morning resulted in exactly such a compromise. The triplets would remain with their age group for homeroom and social activities, but attend advanced classes for specific subjects: mathematics and computer science for Lily, science and literature for Rose, art and music for Violet. Additionally, each would participate in mentorship programs with specialists in their areas of exceptional ability. "Your daughters continue to astonish us," Principal Winters admitted as they concluded the meeting. "Their academic abilities would be remarkable in children much older, but it's their emotional growth over the past year that I find most impressive." Alexander and Diana exchanged pleased glances. The principal continued, "Lily has developed genuine leadership skills, channeling her protective instincts into positive directions. Rose's anxiety has diminished significantly, allowing her natural curiosity to flourish. And Violet, well, her art teacher believes she might be genuinely gifted. Her recent paintings show emotional depth rarely seen in children this age. They've had excellent support," Diana acknowledged, her expression warm as she glanced at Alexander, "from multiple sources." The recognition, simple but significant, meant more to Alexander than any corporate award or financial milestone. 18 months earlier, he had been a stranger to his own daughters. Now he was an essential part of their support system, their development, their lives. As they left the school, Diana's phone chimed with a reminder. "The housewarming party," she groaned. "I completely forgot to prepare anything." Alexander smiled. "I took the liberty of ordering catering. It should be delivered at 4, giving us ample time to set up before guests arrive at 6. Diana shook her head, amused rather than annoyed by his predictable efficiency. "Of course you did. Sometimes your corporate organizational skills are actually useful in real life." The housewarming party marked an important transition. After months of careful consideration, they had decided to sell both brownstones and purchase a single larger home nearby, a beautiful Victorian with enough space for the entire family while maintaining appropriate boundaries. The triplets would each have their own bedroom for the first time in their lives, with a shared study area between them. Diana and Alexander would have separate master suites on opposite sides of the house, maintaining their status as co-parents rather than a couple, while creating a unified home for their daughters. The decision had been practical, driven by logistics and the girls' evolving needs, but it represented something deeper. the final integration of their unexpected family unit, the acknowledgement that their lives were permanently intertwined, regardless of the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. The party itself reflected this evolution, a blend of Alexander's corporate connections and Diana's academic colleagues, Vertex executives chatting with hospital researchers, neighbors mixing with school parents. The triplets moved through the gathering with growing social confidence, Lily engaging Alexander's board chairman in a serious discussion about mathematics education, Rose explaining her summer research plans to Diana's laboratory director, Violet, showing her recent artwork to Alexander's sister Charlotte, who had become a devoted aunt despite the surprise of suddenly acquiring 3 nieces. "You've created quite a family," Charlotte commented to Alexander as they watched Diana laughing with a group of colleagues, the triplets demonstrating their secret handshake to fascinated guests. "Nothing like what any of us expected for you, but somehow perfect." Alexander nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Not created, discovered. They existed before me, formed by Diana's remarkable parenting under impossible circumstances. I'm just fortunate to have found my way into their world." Charlotte studied her brother with the directness that had always characterized their relationship. "You're different now, happier, more human." "More myself," Alexander corrected. "Or perhaps becoming the person I was meant to be before I constructed an identity around achievement and control." The party continued into the evening, guests gradually departing until only the core family remained. As Alexander helped Diana clear away the last of the glasses, the triplets curled up together on the window seat, whispering among themselves with the conspiratorial air that signaled they were planning something. "Should we be concerned?" Alexander asked Diana quietly, nodding toward their daughters. Diana smiled. "They've been plotting something for days. I suspect we're about to find out what." As if on cue, Lily cleared her throat importantly. "We have an announcement," she declared, her tone formal despite her casual appearance in jeans and a Vertex Technologies t-shirt from the company's family picnic. "We've been thinking about our last name," Rose continued. "Always the detail-oriented, middle sister. And we've made a decision." Violet, completing the presentation, as she often did with the emotional heart of the matter, said simply, "We want to be Morgan Reeds, to honor both of you, if that's okay." The request, unexpected and touching, momentarily silenced both parents. Alexander looked to Diana, aware that this decision particularly impacted her, who had raised the girls alone under her name for 7 years. Diana's eyes glistened slightly. "I think that's a beautiful choice," she said finally. "It represents who you are, daughters of both your father and mother, products of both our contributions to your lives." Alexander, finding his own voice, added, "Names are important. They tell the world something about your identity, your belonging. Morgan Reed tells a complete story, where you began and where your journey has taken you." The triplets exchanged satisfied glances, clearly pleased with their parents' reaction. "We'll need new pencil cases," Rose noted practically, "and to inform the school administration for next year's records. And new monograms on our backpacks," Lily added, always attentive to tangible details. LEMR, RCMR, and VAMR. Violet, in her characteristic way, said nothing but crossed the room to hug first Diana, and then, after only the briefest hesitation, Alexander, a spontaneous physical demonstration of affection that she rarely initiated. Alexander returned, the embrace carefully, still sometimes amazed that these remarkable children shared his DNA, his features, his intelligence, and now his name. Later that night, after the triplets had gone to bed, Diana joined Alexander on the back porch of the brownstone, the garden lights illuminating the spring flowers in a gentle glow. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the events of the day settling around them. "Morgan Reed," Diana said finally, testing the sound of it. "Not what I imagined when I filled out their birth certificates alone in that hospital room 8 years ago." Alexander nodded, understanding both the spoken words and the unspoken emotion behind them. Life rarely follows our imagined trajectories. Sometimes the unexpected detours lead to better destinations. Diana smiled at the philosophical observation, so different from the ruthlessly efficient corporate language that had characterized their early interactions after his discovery of the triplets. "Very profound, Mr. Reed. Next, you'll be telling me everything happens for a reason." "Not necessarily," Alexander replied, his tone thoughtful. "But we can create meaning from whatever circumstances we encounter. You did that as a single mother, creating stability from precarious conditions. I'd like to think I'm learning to do the same, transforming an unexpected discovery into genuine fatherhood." Diana studied him in the dim light, her expression softening. "You've come a long way from the CEO who couldn't understand why I didn't tell you about the pregnancy. The girls see it too, your evolution. It's why they want your name alongside mine." The simple validation, acknowledgement of his growth, his effort, his commitment, meant more than any corporate achievement. Alexander had spent his entire adult life accumulating external markers of success, never realizing the hollow center of such accomplishments until 3 identical faces had appeared outside Vertex Technologies, silently challenging everything he thought he valued. "The new house will be ready next month," he noted, changing the subject before emotion overwhelmed his customary composure. "The contractors confirmed today. The girls' rooms are already painted to their specifications." Diana nodded, accepting the conversational shift. "Purple for Violet, blue for Rose, and red for Lily, with that complicated mathematical mural your design team created, and the connecting doorways between their rooms, as requested, though I suspect they'll gradually develop more desire for privacy as they grow older." "Perhaps," Diana agreed, "though their bond remains extraordinary. Dr. Martinez says their identical twinning, or in this case, tripleting, created a physical and psychological connection that will always be part of their identity, even as they increasingly differentiate." Alexander considered this. Like DNA itself, identical genetic material expressing differently based on environmental factors and individual experience. "Trust you to make human development sound like a scientific algorithm," Diana teased, but her tone was affectionate rather than critical. Alexander smiled, acknowledging the observation. "Old habits, though I like to think I've developed some new ones over the past 18 months. Before Diana could respond, a small figure appeared in the doorway, Rose, clutching her ever-present backpack, though she carried it less frequently now that their lives had stabilized. "I had the dream again," she said quietly, referring to the recurring nightmare that had plagued her since Diana's illness, a dream of hospitals, of being separated from her sisters, of everything falling apart. Alexander had learned that Rose's anxiety manifested most strongly at night, when her brilliant mind couldn't distract itself with facts and information. Diana started to rise, but Alexander gestured for her to remain seated. "Would you like to sit with us for a while?" he offered, making space on the porch swing. "Sometimes the night air helps clear away troubling thoughts." Rose nodded, settling between them with the natural trust that had developed gradually, over months of consistent presence and reliability. "I know it's not logical to worry," she said, her voice small but determined. "The doctors said Mum is in remission. We have financial security now. We're never going back to the bad times." Emotions aren't always logical," Alexander responded, drawing on his own challenging journey toward emotional intelligence. "They're information of a different kind, important signals about things that matter to us." Rose considered this, her analytical mind always seeking to categorize and understand. So, feeling afraid doesn't mean I'm being silly or babyish. Not at all, Diana assured her, stroking her daughter's hair gently. It means you care deeply about our family staying together and staying safe. That's wisdom, not weakness. Rose leaned into the touch, her body gradually relaxing. The new house has an alarm system and fire sprinklers, she noted drowsily, and a generator for power outages. Dad made sure. The casual reference to Dad, still relatively new in the Triplets vocabulary, sent a now familiar warmth through Alexander. The first time each girl had used the term had been carefully noted in his memory. Lily during a heated mathematical debate when Alexander had felt too formal, Rose while presenting her science project to classmates, Violet in a whispered, "Thank you," after he'd defended her quietness to an overzealous teacher who mistook her silence for disengagement. As Rose drifted back to sleep between them, her breathing deep and even, Alexander and Diana exchanged glances over her head. A moment of silent communication that had become increasingly common as they navigated the complex terrain of co-parenting. Diana nodded slightly, and Alexander carefully lifted Rose, carrying her back to bed where her sisters slept peacefully. He paused in the doorway of the girls' room, watching the three identical faces in repose. In sleep, their growing differentiation disappeared. They looked as they had that first day outside Vertex, like perfect copies of one original. Yet Alexander could now easily distinguish them even in stillness. Lily's slight frown as she processed information even in dreams, Rose's hands curled protectively around her ever-present backpack, Violet's artistic fingers splayed across her. A pillow. Returning to the porch, Alexander found Diana gathering their empty teacups, preparing to retire for the night. "She went right back to sleep," he reported. "The nightmares are becoming less frequent." Diana nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. All three are healing in their own ways. Lily doesn't feel she has to control everything anymore. Rose is learning to manage her anxiety. Violet is finding her voice, literally and artistically. "They're extraordinary children," Alexander said, not for the first time, "resilient beyond measure." "Children often are," Diana replied, "given the right support and enough love." She paused, studying him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You've become an essential part of that support system, Alexander. Whatever complicated history led us here, I'm grateful the girls have you now." The acknowledgement, simple but profound from a woman who had raised these remarkable children, alone through unimaginable hardship, affected Alexander deeply. "I'm the grateful one," he managed after a moment, "for the chance to know them, to be their father." Diana smiled, understanding the emotion behind his carefully measured words. "Good night, Alexander. See you in the morning for the usual chaos." As Diana returned to her side of the brownstone, Alexander remained on the porch, contemplating the starlit garden that connected their homes. A physical manifestation of the relationship they had carefully constructed, separate but connected, independent but united by three remarkable children. 2 years ago, Alexander Reed had been Boston's most eligible bachelor, a technological wunderkind with a billion-dollar company and an empty penthouse. His days had been measured in product launches and market valuations. His human connections, limited to business partnerships and superficial social engagements, he had believed himself complete, successful, fulfilled, unaware of the hollow core at the center of his carefully constructed life. Now his days revolved around school schedules and soccer practices, bedtime stories and science projects. His home echoed with laughter, arguments, music lessons, and the thousand small sounds of family life. His calendar prioritized parent-teacher, conferences over board meetings, birthday parties over business dinners. By conventional corporate measures, Alexander had stepped back, relinquishing his position as CEO to become merely chairman, delegating responsibilities he once would have insisted on controlling personally. But by the measures that now mattered to him, he had stepped forward into a richer, more complex, more rewarding life than he had ever imagined possible. The triplets, Lily, Rose, and Violet, had appeared outside his building on a cold Boston morning, a coincidence that seemed increasingly like destiny. Their identical faces had challenged everything Alexander thought he understood about success, connection, and purpose. In seeking to provide for them materially, he had received something far more valuable: the opportunity to evolve beyond the limited identity he had constructed, to discover capacities for love, patience, and joy he hadn't known himself capable of experiencing. As Alexander finally rose to enter his home, he glanced back at the garden, at the tulips and daffodils planted by 6 small hands, at the patio where family meals were shared, at the connecting pathway between 2 houses soon to be exchanged for a single home with room for all. The corporate empire he had built from brilliant ideas and relentless determination paled in comparison to this more profound creation. A family forged not from conventional origins, but from rediscovered connections, second chances, and the remarkable resilience of 3 identical girls who had once begged outside his building and now carried his name alongside their mothers. Life's most significant discoveries, Alexander had learned, often came disguised as disruptions, inconveniences, or complete derailments of carefully laid plans. The DNA test results that had confirmed what his heart already suspected, that Lily, Rose, and Violet were indeed his biological daughters, had been merely scientific validation of a deeper truth. Family could be found in unexpected places, created through unconventional circumstances, nurtured despite complicated beginnings. The greatest success of Alexander Reed's life had nothing to do with technological innovation or financial achievement. It was measured instead in 3 distinct versions of his own amber eyes, looking back at him with increasing trust. In bedtime, conversations about mathematics, science, and art. In the simple word, Dad, spoken in 3 identical voices that somehow managed to make it sound entirely different each time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.